The February night over Tsemes Bay in 1943 was filled with the icy breath of the sea and an impenetrable darkness that seemed almost palpable. In this dense fog, where salty water mixed with fine frost, shadows glided, small boats and launches moving almost silently, save for the muffled rumble of engines wrapped in thick cloth. On board these vessels were men whose faces were covered in a thick layer of soot, so that no accidental glint would betray their presence to the enemy. Among them stood out a man with a cold gaze and the precise manners of a commander, Major Caesar Kunikov. He knew that their mission was considered auxiliary, almost unnoticed against the grand plan to liberate Novorossiysk. But it was at this moment, when the first boot touched the rocky shore in the Stanichka area, that a story began to be created that decades later would turn into something much greater than just a military operation. This patch of land, barely 30 square kilometers, entered the annals under a name that is known today by everyone who has even a little interest in the events of that time. However, behind the pathos of monuments and ceremonial speeches lies a complex and sometimes contradictory reality. To understand how a small landing bridgehead became the central element of a state cult, it is necessary to go back to those days when the outcome of the confrontation on the southern flank of the great conflict hung by a thread. The spring of 1943 was a time of hopes and immense strain. After the triumph on the Volga, it was necessary to develop the success, and the Taman Peninsula presented an ideal platform for a decisive strike. The command's plan was ambitious. A simultaneous attack from land and sea was to encircle the enemy and clear the strategically important port. The main strike was planned in the area of Yuzhnaya Ozereka. There, the main forces, tanks and artillery were concentrated. Kunikov's group, however, was assigned the role of a diversionary maneuver, a demonstration of activity designed to confuse the defenders and force them to disperse reserves. No one could have predicted that on that night the logic of war would go against the staff maps. The main landing force encountered insurmountable difficulties. Poor coordination, delayed ships, and powerful fire from coastal batteries turned the operation into a tragedy. At the same time, Kunikov's men, having landed on the outskirts of the city, were able not only to gain a foothold, but also to expand their presence. A small setback turned into the only success that the leadership seized upon, turning the auxiliary bridgehead into the main hope of the front. The space where the events unfolded was extremely inconvenient for defense. It was a strip of land pressed against the sea, exposed to fire from all surrounding heights. Every movement here was noticeable. Every attempt to deliver supplies turned into a life-threatening adventure. But it was here, in inhuman conditions, that the very everyday life was born that would later be described in millions of memoirs. Life on this patch turned into continuous underground activity. People literally gnawed into the rocky ground, creating labyrinths of trenches, dugouts, and hospitals underground. The lack of fresh water, the constant shortage of food, and the endless roar of explosions became the backdrop against which the character of those who decided not to retreat a single step was forged. 225 days this confrontation lasted, a figure that in itself inspires respect. But if one looks closer at the details, the picture becomes even more impressive. The enemy, understanding the importance of this bridgehead, spared no shells. According to calculations, for every defender there were several hundred kilograms of iron and explosives. But the bridgehead lived. It became a symbol of perseverance, where tactical calculations receded before the will to resist. In this cramped space, where the enemy was sometimes only a few tens of meters away, social and rank differences were erased. only the common task and the daily struggle to maintain one's presence on this land remained. However, beneath the outward layer of heroic defense always lies a layer of personal stories and internal conflicts. Among those who were on Malaya Zemlya in those days was a young colonel, head of the political department of the 18th Army, Leonid Brezhnev. At that time, he was just one of many officers doing his job. His tasks were related to maintaining morale, organizing party work, and ensuring communication between command and soldiers. There are records of his repeated visits to the bridgehead, how his boat came under fire, and how he communicated with ordinary soldiers in the trenches. At that moment, it was common for a political worker of that level, but it is precisely these episodes that would form the foundation for a future grand legend. The internal conflict of each participant in those events lay in the need to maintain sanity in conditions where logic suggested the impossibility of success. The command demanded that positions be held at all costs, despite the fact that the strategic situation around Novorossiysk was changing slowly. For ordinary soldiers, Malaya Zemlya was not a great achievement, but a daily struggle for the right to see the next dawn. It was a clash of personal fear and collective responsibility, where every choice had instantaneous consequences. The psychological pressure was colossal, the realization that behind them was only the cold sea, and ahead, reinforced enemy positions, created a unique state of mind that would later be called Malozemelsky Brotherhood. The personalities involved in this process were very diverse. Caesar Kunikov, who fell in the early days of the operation, became an icon whose image was necessary to maintain the myth. His decisiveness and professionalism were beyond doubt, but his early demise spared him from having to participate in the subsequent political games surrounding the history of the bridgehead. Other officers, such as Army Commander Leselidze, solved the most complex problems of supplying and coordinating actions in conditions where traditional management methods did not work. The clash of ambitions, disputes about tactics, and the constant search for culprits in the failures of the main landing, all this was part of the hidden life of the headquarters, which differed markedly from what would later be written in textbooks. If one looks at the events from an ideological point of view, Malaya Zemlya became a battlefield not only for armies, but also for meanings. For one side, it was a symbol of the unwavering steadfastness of the Soviet man. For the other, an annoying obstacle that could not be eliminated despite all the rules of military art. Here, two systems of values clashed. One prioritized orders and collective self-sacrifice, the other, technical superiority and disciplined force. The paradox was that the strategic significance of this patch of land was often questioned even by contemporaries. There were voices claiming that the resources spent on holding it could have been used more effectively in other sectors of the front. But as soon as an event acquires symbolic status, rational arguments cease to play a leading role. The transformation of the perception of Malaya Zemlya did not begin immediately after the war. In the first post-war years, it remained just one of many glorious pages, standing alongside the battle for the Caucasus. The real turning point occurred 3 decades later, when Leonid Ilyich Brezhnev took charge of the country. In search of legitimacy and the need to create his own heroic epic, the ideological machine turned to his military past. The choice fell on Novorossiysk, and that very operation in February of '43. Malaya Zemlya began to grow in scale right before our eyes. From an important yet still local episode, it began to turn into an event comparable to Stalingrad or the Kursk Bulge. This process was meticulously planned. A book of the same name was written and published in multi-million copies, becoming mandatory reading for every citizen. Actors read it on the radio, composers dedicated oratorios to it, and a magnificent memorial complex was erected in Novorossiysk itself. The story began to acquire details that emphasized the exceptional role of the future General Secretary. It suddenly turned out that it was precisely his advice and personal courage that were the key to the success of the operation. In the public consciousness, a picture emerged where the fate of the entire war was decided precisely on these 30 square kilometers. Such artificial inflation of scale led to an unexpected result. Anecdotes began to emerge among the people, ironically playing on the excessive attention paid to this episode. "Where were you during the war?" "I fought on Malaya Zemlya," and "I, on Bolshaya." This bitter irony reflected the gap between the real feat of the people who truly suffered and sacrificed themselves there and the glossy, politicized image that was imposed from above. The conflict between the living memory of veterans and the official myth became deep and painful. The true heroes of the bridgehead became hostages of a personality cult, which, on the one hand, glorified their place of service, and on the other, devalued the sincerity of their feelings. The culmination of this process came in the late 70s to early 80s. Malaya Zemlya became the center of the official discourse on the war. Each anniversary was celebrated with unprecedented pomp. It was at this moment that the final break occurred. For the system, it was a triumph of ideology. For the people, it was a symbol of the leadership's senile infirmity and loss of proportion. It is important to understand that the events of 1943 themselves did not become less significant because of this. Those who lay in rocky crevices under the fire of, quote, "3" were not to blame for their pain being used for political manipulation 35 years later. When we analyze those events today, we are faced with the need to separate the wheat from the chaff. The tragedy and triumph of Malaya Zemlya lie not in whether it was a, quote, "4, but in how easily truth can be distorted to serve the current moment. The lessons of this story lie in understanding how state memory works. We see that any attempt to monopolize the right to history leads to its emasculation. When an event turns into a dogma, it ceases to inspire and begins to provoke rejection. But if we remove the layers of later propaganda, what remains before us is the simple and terrible truth about people who performed their duty in unbearable conditions. Today's resonance of this topic is connected with the universal question: how should we relate to our past? Should we accept it only as a beautiful legend? Or do we have enough courage to see mistakes, accidents, and injustice? Malaya Zemlya teaches us that real heroism does not need exaggeration. The courage of Kunikov's paratroopers, the steadfastness of the infantrymen, the work of nurses in underground grottos, all this is valuable in itself. Artificial glorification only prevents us from truly empathizing with those who held this shore for 7 months. The significance of this episode for contemporary times is hard to overestimate. In an era of information warfare and the creation of new myths, Malaya Zemlya serves as a vivid example of how historical narratives are formed. It is a reminder that behind every large number in reports stand specific human destinies, often forgotten beneath the gleam of medals on dress uniforms. History is not only a chronology of victories, it is also the story of how we tell these victories. The paradox is that, in attempting to make an event greater, ideologues often make it less human. Returning to that February night in 1943, we see a completely different picture than the one presented in later memoirs. We see cold, fear, communication errors, and the chaos of battle. We see people who were not thinking of eternity but simply trying to secure a rope on a slippery stone. It is this down-to-earth physical reality that constitutes the true feat. Caesar Kunikov, who did not live to see the city liberated, is remembered as a man of action, not a character from a party brochure. Malaya Zemlya, in its original form, is a story of how, against all odds, with the sheer enthusiasm and professionalism of a handful of people, the course of events can be changed, even if you were initially assigned merely a decorative role. Concluding this journey through the pages of the past, we once again find ourselves on the shore of Tsemes Bay. Today, modern streets hum here, and the sea licks the same stones as it did 80 years ago. If one closes their eyes and discards everything we know about the subsequent decades, one can hear only the lapping of water and a distant echo of events that forever changed this landscape. The true greatness of Malaya Zemlya lies not in book circulations or the pathos of tribunes. It lies in those silent witnesses, old bunkers and overgrown trenches that remember the truth. This truth is that any land becomes great if even one life is given for it, and no political winds can completely erase this trace if we are willing to look at history with open eyes, without filters and distortions. Ultimately, the history of Malaya Zemlya is a mirror reflecting the path of the entire country. From the sincere impulse and terrible sacrifice of the early years to the stagnation and formalism of later eras. Understanding this process gives us the key to realizing how important it is to preserve the purity of memory. For someday, our time too will become history. And then, in the same way, someone will try to separate our real achievements from the myths we may be creating today. And the best monument to those who fought on Stanichka will be our striving for truth, however complex and multifaceted it may be. This narrative about a small bridgehead reminds us of the fragility of human life and the colossal power of words. A word can elevate, or it can distort. Our task is to use words in a way that makes them guides to understanding, not instruments of oblivion. The path from landing boat to state cult has been traversed, and now that passions have subsided, we can simply bow to that land which was indeed small in size, but immense in significance for those who remained on it forever. Their silence today is the loudest voice of truth that we should learn to hear through the noise of time and the hustle of everyday life. Every time the events of 43 are mentioned, we must remember, history does not belong to rulers. It belongs to those who created it with their own hands, often unaware of their future greatness. And Malaya Zemlya will remain like this for centuries, harsh, rocky, imbued with salt and sweat, free from later layers, and truly alive in the memory of generations. This is its main resonance, its lesson, and its eternal significance for all of us. Reflecting on the past, we inevitably look to the future. What will it be like? It depends on what lessons we have learned from the experience of our predecessors. The story of the artificially inflated significance of Malaya Zemlya teaches us critical thinking and respect for facts. It shows that true recognition does not need intrusive advertising. It lives in the hearts of people, in quiet gratitude, and in the desire to prevent the recurrence of tragedies. This path of self-knowledge through history is the most valuable thing we can take away from studying the events of those years. Concluding our narrative, we want to believe that the image of that cold night in Tsemes Bay will remain in memory not as a page from a textbook, but as a living reminder of the price of peace, of how every peaceful day is underpinned by 225 days of struggle on a small patch of land. And this awareness is the best monument we can erect in our souls. May the history of Malaya Zemlya serve as a reminder that truth always finds its way to the light, even if attempts are made to hide it under the gilding of official myths. In this eternal movement towards truth lies the meaning of our appeal to the past. When we look at modern footage of Novorossiysk, we see a flourishing city, a port full of ships, and a peaceful sky. But beneath this shell of prosperity lies a foundation laid by those who, in February '43, didn't know if they would live to see the morning. Their legacy is not only the freedom of the region, but also an important ethical question they left us: how to remain human in inhumane conditions, and how to stay true to oneself when the world around is collapsing. Each person finds the answer to this question for themselves, looking at the dark waters of the sea that once embraced those who made Malaya Zemlya great. Thus, the circle of time closes. From the paratrooper's first step on shore to the last word in the General Secretary's memoirs and our present understanding, history continues, and there will always be room in it for new discoveries, for revising old dogmas, and for deep, sincere respect for genuine courage. Malaya Zemlya was, is, and will be an important lesson for all of us. A lesson in resilience, truth, and memory that outlives any rulers and any ideologies. And in this lies its ultimate justice and its enduring power.